A reading of the Holy Gospel according to Mark, the 6th chapter. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. When they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moored the boat. When they got out of the boat, people at once recognized him and rushed about that whole region and began to bring the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages or cities or farms, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak. And all who touched it were healed. The Gospel of the Lord. Be seated. It's been said that love without action is ineffective. But action without love is empty. Or a related saying is that activity without reflection is mere busyness. But reflection without action is really just idleness or indifference. In today's gospel reading, we can make the case for a both-and kind of world. There's certainly in that reading the reflection of the frenetic pace of ministry for Jesus and his friends. Earlier, Jesus had sent his friends out, and they were coming back to share with him as this reading begins, reporting all that they had seen and done and taught. It's not quite a fiscal annual report with facts and figures, but it is a reporting back of what it was like to be a part of this ministry together. They hurried here, they rushed about, there was a great crowd begging him, there was no leisure even for them to eat. What is Jesus' response to all of this activity and hurriedness? He says, "Come away to a deserted place and rest a while." Knowing that we both need action and movement, but we also need rest and reflection. This time of the year, I'm especially mindful of a place that was a place for reflection for me. It was a jetty of rocks where the surf meets the sand. It's probably 56th or 57th Street, Ocean City, New Jersey. Rocks underneath an old fishing pier that's no longer used. I would go there as a teen or as a young adult seeking a little solace, a little silence. It was a deserted place, but not a lonely place, because it was just a half a block or a block from where everyone was swimming or sunbathing. And there on the rocks, I could in silence wonder at creation, watch the waves crash into the rocks making their ways up to where I was, the sand swirling around as the surf went back out, the sand crabs frittering away, the seagulls flying over, the unexpected upsplash of water refreshing me at times. I haven't been back to that place physically in a long time, but I go there mentally regularly, because it was a place of curiosity and wonder, of joy and restfulness. Come away to a deserted place and rest a while, Jesus says. But this reading contains more than just advice on taking a break. It actually gives us a clue as to why, as Christians, we're so eager to emphasize education. It gives a clue why we have seminaries and why we endeavor with Sunday school or vacation Bible school or encourage people to read their Bibles or have creeds and pay attention to what the words in those creeds say. The clue is in verse 34, that we're not just a believe it and be done with it community. As Jesus went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Now you have to contemplate for a second, what are sheep without a shepherd like? I mean, what adjectives would you use to describe sheep without a shepherd? If you were a sheep, maybe you would be like, free, yay, I can go anywhere I want without the shepherd. But the more you think about it, sheep without a shepherd are vulnerable. They're unprotected. They might be scared. They might be scattered, directionless. Jesus saw this great crowd of humanity, and he realized our propensity to go after things that are not helpful for us, like sheep without a shepherd. And so it says, he began to teach them many things. Let me tell you a story. Jesus would teach, life is like a prodigal son or daughter who goes away but realizes their mistake, and when they come back are welcomed by this amazing grace. Jesus taught them many things. Great insight as to why learning and openness to grow in our faith is such an important part of our response to God's grace. But this text contains more than just advice to take a break or more than a clue as to why education is important. It also shows the importance of healing and wholeness and community in the Jesus movement. It's very clear that the very DNA of the movement Jesus initiated is committed to healing and wholeness. They rushed about to bring him the sick. From the villages, from the cities, from the farms, they brought to the marketplace all who were ill, who longed to touch even the fringe of his cloak, and those who did were healed. The ministry of healing left an indelible mark on Jesus' first followers, and they continued that ministry of healing, maybe not in the same exact miraculous way that only Jesus can, but in a miraculous way of staying power. Rodney Stark wrote a history of Christianity. He was curious, how did this little band of believers in Palestine, maybe 1,000 to start with, how did it go global in just 3 centuries? And he looked into the growth rate of 40% per decade for 300 years. And he wanted to know, what made that happen? What made that possible? And certainly some would say, well, the miracle of the Holy Spirit in people's lives. And yes, that's part of it. But he wanted to know some of the practicalities underneath of it. And so Rodney Stark, in his book, The Rise of Christianity, suggests there were 4 things that were done to make it possible that set the Christians apart. 1, a theology of love. 2, social networking, go figure. Number 3, stance against adultery, abortion, and infanticide. And number 4, the one that I want to focus on this morning, caring for the sick, widows, and orphans. It's noted in the histories that when plagues happened in cities or when calamities came, it was the Christians, it was the Jesus movement who stayed as others were fleeing for safety. They stayed to take care not only of their own who were stricken with the plagues, but of those who were not theirs, who would be called pagans. And people looked at that and marveled at why they were doing it. Research like Rodney Stark's provides an unmistakable and powerful lesson. The regular witness of ordinary, everyday Christian people tending to the poor, the orphans, and the sick in their own urban communities contributed decisively to Christianity's early tremendous growth. Maybe that's why it makes sense that in this text people are swarming to Jesus. A sense of healing, a sense of community, a sense of caring for one another. People are swarming to him. Did you hear? There were great crowds everywhere he went, everywhere he was recognized, everywhere the disciples were recognized. People came. And so too in the early church, if that growth rate is correct, 40% per decade, people were swarming for the right reasons to goodness and mercy. Now this week I had an experience of a swarming of a different type that is not a helpful swarming. Actually, I avoided it just barely. My son and I were playing catch with a hard ball in our yard, and one of our wayward throws went under the bushes into the undergrowth area where the hydrangeas are and lots of other things growing. And at first we looked around to see where that ball was, and we couldn't find it. So I got a rake out of the garage, and I started lifting up the undergrowth and trying to see if we could find that baseball. And sure enough, under about a dozen hydrangea blooms, I lifted it up and came face to face with a beehive the size of a cantaloupe. Now, the moral of the story is not that I should weed my garden more often. The moral of the story, I was reminded just of how those bees can swarm when they need to protect themselves. And the beauty of how bees work together when they're not swarming, even working together to go out and pollinate the world so that the world will grow around us. And what a metaphor for all of us as well. To work together in Christian community, to go out and promote growth and share God's goodness with others. Nelson Mandela knew about that. This week marks the 100th anniversary of his birth. In a speech in South Africa in 2008, he said, "A fundamental concern for others in our own lives and in our communities would go a long way in making the world the better place that we so passionately dream of." A fundamental concern for others. Jesus said it, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." He lived it in healing and sharing that healing ministry with his friends. My dear friends, don't let shallow imposters of the 21st century living replace the value of a loving community, of a community that, when it works well and does it right, there is genuine concern for others, where there is balance of rest and reflection with action and sacrificial giving, where there is a value on teaching and learning and living the way of the cross, where we are gathered by the one we call the Good Shepherd. For each of us, as at the end of our commendation liturgy in our funeral says, each of us are a sheep of his own fold, a lamb of his own flock, a sinner of his own redeeming. And now to him who is able to accomplish abundantly beyond all we could ask or imagine, to him be glory, now and forever. Amen.